Go ahead. All right, let's do it. Good morning then. My name is Quinn Dombrowski and I am the DLCL ATS at Stanford. And for those of you who aren't up on all the acronyms bright and early this morning, that would be the Academic Technology Specialist in the Division of Literatures, Cultures, and Languages, which basically is more words that also don't necessarily tell you a whole lot about what I do. What that translates to concretely is I essentially do digital humanities support for literatures that aren't English, classics, or East Asian. Any other literatures are in my purview. I've been working in digital humanities since about 2004. Email, Twitter, feel free to tweet if you are so inclined. All right, slide. All right, so this talk has given me an opportunity to revisit a talk that I gave in 2013 at the Bay Area Drupal Camp, sort of an academic session, and think about how things have progressed since then and where we might be able to go from the current moment that we find ourselves in. So Drupal and Higher Ed is still, fairly widespread as a platform for administrative websites, informational websites. This was Open Berkeley, which was sort of ironic because it wasn't exact. It was actually a fairly constrained version of Drupal that Berkeley made available. When I was working there, I only moved to Stanford in the fall, and I would have killed to have Stanford sites or even a ghostly approximation of Stanford sites, just with the ease that it provides people for spinning up basic and even fairly complex websites with a Drupal backend without having to own all of the maintenance and labor and upkeep that inherently comes with any content management system. And I appreciate every one of your gray hairs. Your gray hairs are saving me the same, and I am very grateful. So back in 2013, there was Open Scholar, and there were a couple other platforms that were battling for market position. I ended up looking this up yesterday, and I guess Open Scholar is still out there. I think it's moving to Drupal 8. So that's one that kind of has made this leap onto Drupal 8, despite the major technical chasm between that and Drupal 7 that was the previous underpinnings. For teaching, I was heartened to see that the e-learning management system is still in existence, and it's still people are still using it and building on it. It wasn't totally clear to me to what extent they had committed to moving to Drupal 8, or if they were still kind of navigating a path as many of us are. And in 2013, I noted that, while there were platforms and things that were out of the box that were, being developed to support, some of these more uniform applications of Drupal and Higher Ed, for teaching, for administration, for informational websites, there really wasn't the equivalent for research. And the fact is, then as now, technology for the humanities still is not all that widespread. I mean, people use Word. People put together, what they think of as a database is more or less like a bunch of things copied and pasted into a Word document, or if you're being really fancy and structured, maybe an Excel file. And while there are certainly people on the cutting edge of digital humanities and use of technology as a research tool and not just like a presentation method for your materials online, still the vast majority of scholars in the humanities are still very print oriented, and that seems unlikely to change anytime too soon. There are platforms for dissemination of scholarship. So Omeka is a fairly well-known one within the digital humanities community, and the library community is mostly focused on building exhibits, highlighting objects, images and maps and timelines and those sorts of things. Not as much for analysis, but really more kind of presentation of materials. There was also, then as now, WordPress is quite widely used for when people need to spin up a website to highlight their research, put it online in an easily readable way. There are people using WordPress and BuddyPress and other derivatives of BuddyPress, like the Commons in a Box platform, for creating scholarly networks. But then there was Drupal, which there was a lot of potential there in 2013, but the tutorials, as we all know, like the documentation is spotty, was spotty, is spotty, continues to be spotty, especially if you are not a technically oriented person. While there are plenty of tutorials, there's no shortage of videos, all of the use cases that you usually find are like, you want to spin up an e-commerce site. And it's a big ask to ask scholars to try to translate what they want to do with Drupal into kind of the framework and the terminology and the tools that are presented in the context of an e-commerce site or the like. Back then, and still now, perhaps even more so, I felt the distros don't really help. In a certain sense, distros basically, at least the way they used to be run, you install a distro, everything is great, but then if you need to update a module, you're dependent on the distro creator to update that module and push an update to your platform. And when scholars are creating distros, they don't have the bandwidth. I mean, they don't have the bandwidth to like update their own site, let alone like test and debug and update a whole distro and push it out to a bunch of other scholars who don't have time to test to make sure it works with their thing. I mean, the workflow and the expectations for the technical expertise and time that goes into these sorts of structures really isn't there for individual scholars doing research projects. So my favorite site that I have built in Drupal and maintained now for going on a decade actually just got out of beta this year. I was talking about it in 2013, and only finally this year did it officially go out of beta, by which I mean the site was the same as it's been for probably the last 4 years, but the faculty member finally felt confident enough that she removed the currently in beta subtitle underneath the header. It's always a process with these sites. When you want to commit to it being in a state where you're comfortable calling it not a test thing. So Bulgarian dialectology, it's a rich and complex field. People have gone out to villages in Bulgaria for decades now, talking to people and recording how they pronounce different words, how they say different things. But this faculty member, Renelle Alexander at UC Berkeley, wanted to do something a little bit different. Instead of just getting individual word lists, she went out into the field and took I think originally it was a tape recorder, and just recorded naturalistic dialogue with people in villages about, culture and life and traditional practices. And the plan was to transcribe all of this and create a print edition of these transcripts of the conversations. So this is an example of what we were starting with. A transcript where it was translated. Every single word was transliterated into Latin characters. In Bulgaria, they use Cyrillic. And every single word was glossed, so given the linguistic features and the meaning and some linguistic annotations on it. So we thought through, what would this look like as a database? And what would this look like as a database in Drupal? And we had all these different content types. The blue boxes are content types. The different things underneath it are fields, and this is how they all interlink together. And we were able to create, from this static print edition, not only recreate that print edition online, but also create visualizations. So here's a map that shows all the different locations. Here's what their line entry interface looked like. So people were able to, it was mostly students, and for that matter, students who couldn't read Bulgarian for the most part, but they were nonetheless able to kind of one by one put in these words and then add the metadata about each word just through an easy point and click interface. And then here's the text display with linguistic metadata that more or less recreates the print version they were trying to create. And there's a readable text display. One of the amazing things about Drupal, of course, is through the power of views, you can completely reformat your output with fairly little effort. Whereas if going back to her original print modality, she would have more or less had to start from scratch to create this view versus this one. There was also a lexicon that we were able to generate pretty easily, just grouping words by the dictionary form of those words. And we were able to search and browse for different linguistic traits. And this is an example that I've used again and again, but between 2013 and 2017, I've probably taught a couple dozen humanists to build their own Drupal sites. These are for the most part non-coding people, no PHP, no CSS, maybe HTML a little bit, but really anything that looks like a bracket, anything that looks like code will make them very edgy and nervous for the most part. But nonetheless, working through this step by step, and the fact that Drupal provides a user interface for making all sorts of fairly complex decisions about how to structure a site, how to structure displays. It was really successful, and we've gotten all of these students through and feeling empowered to build their own sites, which saves them a lot of time. If you consider the money, especially grant funds that go to hiring external contractors, leaves them with a feeling of, understanding what their site does, and if something goes wrong, or if they want to do something new, like they feel empowered to make that happen. And as part of this, I wrote this book, Drupal for Humanists, which was very exciting. Unfortunately, it came out on election day 2016, at which point no one cared, including me. But it's out there, and I hear from people periodically that they use it and it's useful. Interestingly, for this audience, Drupal jargon was really a problem. This is something that, like, regardless of what platform you're using, if you're going from an environment that has a specialized jargon, for good reason, and you're trying to teach this to a non-technical audience, or an audience where these terms are not at all familiar, you end up with this confusion. So token means just word in linguistics. A field is an academic field. Blocks, or maybe something your kid does. There's titles, those are books, right? And the view is out the window, and it's great. So, explaining to people that, like, when you have to give a piece of content a title, it doesn't have to be a title the way you're thinking of a title. It's just like, it's a Drupal title. Drupal wants this thing, it's called a title, just label it something. Automatic no titles really help with that too. They had to learn a lot about data modeling. And this is, fortunately, it's a skill that can apply across any set of technologies that you choose to implement your data model, but thinking through what are the constraints and opportunities this platform provides, and then how do you map your data onto those. There was a module called partial date that one of the projects ended up funding that allowed more flexible dates, because when you're working with historical data, it's not always like day, month, year, and optionally hour. It's like, maybe you have a month here, maybe you have a month year day there, maybe you have a season here, maybe you have the time of day somewhere else. And it was a field that really came in hand, or a field type that came in really handy to be able to support some of these unusual uses of Drupal. Installing Drupal was, of course, a challenge. Ultimately, we ended up using Pantheon as the basis for all of this, and the ability to go to a cloud hosting environment and for free spin up a thing with one click and save the difficulty of migration to an environment where you'd have to create a database yourself. Save that for later when you've already gotten your feet wet and you're invested in this and you feel like it's worth it. Like, that's a much better way to handle it than make people do it upfront, at which point they're frustrated and just want to go home. And then finding the right balance with this audience, with warnings. When you see a warning, like, how bad of a warning is it? Do you really need to worry? These are all issues when trying to, teach people to fish metaphorically, especially if they don't have much of a technical background. And examples, with these sites were crucial. Again, all the training materials are, e-commerce or like business websites, and seeing what this looks like for humanities projects really helped bridge the gap between the skills they were learning and where they wanted to go. Well, here we are. It's 2019. And examples abound of people using Drupal for digital humanities projects. The Modernist Archives Publishing Project here at Stanford is one that uses Drupal to publish scans of archival documents related to modernist publishing. Entitled Opinions is a podcast that's run off of Drupal here. There's the Book of the Dead in 3D. That basically is a website showing 3D models of Egyptian mummies with annotations. There's the Jan Bruegel art catalog that has a sort of rich metadata about paintings. You can browse through them. There's an image comparison tool. It's mostly JavaScript that's tied into Drupal. A lot of people have worked a lot on these projects, but I think it's become pretty clear that Drupal 8 didn't care about us when it came out. The priorities that drove Drupal 8 development, the things that all the developers were very excited about, no one understood what they were, and they weren't relevant, and no one cared, and it didn't fix the problems that people actually were having with Drupal. It didn't address any of the stumbling blocks that I ran into with these scholars. And for years, I've tried to take it in a positive spirit, saying, all right, it took a while for module adoption to come in Drupal 7. Let's give it some time. Drupal 8 came out before Drupal for Humanists, which is written for 7, came out. And I'm like, it's not a problem. Like, yes, they're taking a different direction, but like, okay, things will catch up. How many years has it been? 4, 5, lots, too many. Drupal still doesn't care about us. The modules that these sites would need to go into Drupal 8, still not there. The problems that they encounter with the user interface and like the user experience for site building, especially for non-technical people, Still problems. Also, the infrastructure you need to be able to run Drupal 8 sites in a way that's not like agonizingly slow, you can't assume the low-cost hosting that these people are using. Like, it's not getting better, and now we're talking about like, oh, plowing ahead to Drupal 9. Like, no, this is not working. And I really have given up hope that is going to start working with Drupal 8. Now, what I've discovered just this fall was that the interests of the community that I'm working with really align better with Backdrop. I was at Berkeley with one of the early presentations of Backdrop, and I was really skeptical. I think I managed to avoid snarky comments in Drupal for Humanists, but if so, it was an act of great will to avoid this, because the message that I got when Backdrop first came out was, hey, we want to continue the Drupal 7 goodness, just rip out your database abstraction layer and completely change all your module code, and then you can use it. And this is a case of, so we can't use the modules we already have. We have to invest more in technical development on these modules. And for what? What are we getting? Why don't we just stick with Drupal 7 and see what happens? Well, we're far enough down the road that we've seen what happened with Drupal 8, and that's not working. But this fall, I was very excited to learn that I was wrong about Backdrop. And while Drupal 8 has been doing its thing over here, the Backdrop developers have actually been addressing some of these things that are major stumbling blocks for the group of users that I work with. So, tokens in core. The first thing that I do in these workshops for humanists is, it becomes a joke on the first day. We're like, we're gonna download and install all these modules. There's probably like 12 things that I have them install just like out of the box to more or less get it to the point of basic functionality. Tokens in core, who would have thought? Automatic node titles in core, another big one. It's on my list of things people always have to install. It's been there since 2015 now. A built-in rich text editor, 2015. Link date email fields, fabulous, all 2015. Responsive layouts, 2016. Installing modules through the UI, like where you can search for it, kind of WordPress style, that thing that everyone wants to do instead of having to like go to Drupal.org, but don't go there to search because you can't search or find anything on Drupal.org. You have to Google for the module name plus Drupal and then download the thing and copy the link, blah, blah, blah. No, you just search for it and then you like install a module thing and it's there and it's been there since 2016. Image and file management through the UI, 2017. Adding images in the rich text editor, 2017. Scheduling posts for the future, that thing people always want to do, 2018, it's there. Automatically closing comments, also lovely, 2018. And it just keeps going. Image browser for inline images, preliminary auto update support, auto update of core. Yeah. Do you know how many of my sites would not have been hacked had that happened? It's amazing. Manual in-app core updates, happened this year too, and just on and on again, where it seems like this is a community, while they're not explicitly aligned with higher ed or research or anything like that. They're focused on small businesses and nonprofit organizations, but very similar users, very similar level of technical expertise, and very similar priorities. So then there's the caveat, to the extent that our interests align with a CMS, Backdrop really does seem to be a community that understands this group of people. But one of the things that we're discovering is that, these scholars build these sites with the expectation they're going to be lasting a really long time. But it's sort of like, buying a pony. You have to keep feeding it that entire time. And, the scholar's sense of when these sites are used is not what you think of for, a website for your company where everyone's on it every day and everyone's always using it. I have multiple projects that I inherited in this job that are built on Drupal, so basically they need weekly updates, and are used 3 months out of the year. How does it make sense to be having to do weekly updates every single week for 3 months of use? And so this has got me thinking about other platforms and tools and things that are maybe better suited to these kinds of occasional use, where there's not a lot of ongoing work on them. They need to be there and they need to be stable in the long term. And so Jekyll and Wax, which is sort of based on Jekyll, and some of these other projects that allow you to generate essentially a static site that has all the maintenance needs of a static site, glorious, might be a better fit for these projects once they're done in some sense. What would it look like to convert from a CMS Because really, it's probably not realistic to expect these scholars to be, figuring out how to use Jekyll from scratch. But how can we go, once something is done, how can we kind of infix it in a form that doesn't require that same level of cost and maintenance? So this is the discussion part of the presentation. I don't have any answers. I'm moving some sites to Backdrop. I'm working on a revised version of Drupal for Humanists called Backdrop for Humanists. The best part was I got to throw out all sorts of stuff. All the stuff you have to install before you start, like that chapter is like, it's down to backup and migrate, which may be in core in the future. So that was great. A lot of other sites I am trying to move onto Jekyll. But there's a lot of work left to be done on Backdrop too, in terms of things like conditional fields and some of these other modules that people expect to be there and functional. But at the end of the day, it's a fairly small developer group still, and that comes with liabilities. I mean, as much as I don't doubt their enthusiasm and dedication and all of their work on it, it does make me slightly nervous. So I'm curious to hear from you all what you're thinking and what you're doing with these kinds of sites, and where you think we might be able to go together as a community to support us in this transition from Drupal 7 to TBD. Yeah. That's not possible for the variety of things. Like if that could happen, if that could fall from the sky. Yeah. Oh, yes. Good point. Sorry for the microphone and the recording. Yeah. If there was a Drupal 8 hosting service that I didn't have to support, it would still need the modules. And there's a lot of module development that would need to be done first. And if you try to do it as a distro with everything baked in, the problem is enough. I have not had a lot of luck trying to distill what people need for these kinds of digital humanities sites into something that you could package up as a distro, and even features are kind of clunky. It's highly customized once you get to the level of configuring Drupal, but it's more or less met by kind of the module environment of Drupal 7. So no, it's hard, but certainly not having to maintain Drupal 8 would be a step in the right direction, but I don't think it would be enough. Yeah.
Trying to answer this question, we launch two development, research and development sites on Drupal 8, and they're extremely challenging to maintain. You can't do, for researchers, you can't use out-of-the-box site style distribution, but they all need something customized. You can't do anything if you're not going to search. And Drupal 8 has been out there for 5 years and was so excited in 2014. Oh, this is going to be a great system. It's 2019. It helped to add one simple flat module to the website that is supported on the site. We know which site we're talking about. I'm very happy to hear that people are looking into Backdrop seriously. Jen Lampton will be today to talk about it, but this seems to be there's a lot of conversations about what's going to happen if Drupal 7 is not supported anymore. And the more I work with Backdrop, the more interesting and the more reliable this distribution seems to be. There are two presentations. One is today a bit more overview of Backdrop and why it's good. The one is tomorrow that is technical. And Drupal 7 has specialized distribution for education, which is called Athena, which is designed to manage classes. We did build on it. It's very good. It met most of our needs. We have a project for medical school that is running their one of their online classrooms because of the campus. The Drupal 7 is still, at this point, winning solution over Drupal 8. And we are still building in Drupal 7 today because the cost of building anything in Drupal 8, it's not affordable to Stanford to deploy. So they would come to us and ask us to quote it on 7 versus 8. It is double the price.
Yep. No, that definitely mirrors my experience. There was one site that was migrated to 8 one of these digital humanities research sites before I started, and it was such a nightmare that they migrated back. Like yeah.
Love to know more about
So it was happened before I was here, but I'd be happy to hook you up with the faculty and folks if that would be interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's, I'm sure why John and I are both here, is we want one platform that we support to be a broader utility to a greater variety of audiences in the university. And I think the academic research audience is one where we hear some positive stories, and then we see some absence of users too. And we know that, from my perspective, we get a whole lot of pressure from our very administrative side of the university to make websites easier and more functional for communication purposes, but we don't engage nearly as much with the user side. So we're fact-finding in this institution to try and figure out, as we're getting ready to roll out Drupal 8, where is the gap between what comes out of the box and what would actually make it a utility tool for people like yourself that are building research sites? Is there any part of that gap that we can build a central service, and is there a place where it's just more practical?
Yeah, no, I'm trying to build as much stuff on Stanford sites as I can. So even this one, this one here started off as Stanford sites, and then I think it ran into a problem with a module unavailability, and now it's hosted by the library. I mean, it basically like even has like some of the Stanford sites like detritus in there. Like it's like file a help ticket if you. It's just like no, I'm a help ticket. So yeah, I mean, I'm trying to build everything I can on Stanford sites, including some of these less complex custom sites. But I am concerned about, you know, the implications of 8 for being able to do that. I mean, especially what's the current status of like Biblio?
Drupal has been recently updated.
What about 8?
But it is not available.
Yeah.
Smaller module site or something, but it's not anywhere close to it.
And there's a version for Backdrop that is available. And it like it's not even just Biblio, it's Biblio done right. Like it fixes all of those things that you're like, why doesn't someone just rewrite Biblio? Well, they did it, which is amazing.
Biblio is an amazing module. It allows anyone who works with Biblio move things around, and it formats it in all the formats that are accepted in academia, and so you can move things into the Terra, from the Terra, or any publication and note is all covered. And we did a recent project with publication when they were supposed to import into CAP system new faculty publications, and Biblio was a lifesaver because we could import, we could select all the publications for a particular faculty with one click, import it into Biblio with one click. Then we would spend the rest of the project by customizing JSON that kept in all that stuff. So without Biblio, it would be almost impossible. So like for academia, it's like no Biblio for Drupal 8.
That's a deal killer.
It's a deal killer. There's a couple of other modules that are like, oh, they're in bad shape or something, like, not to mention these modules, which like.
Oh yeah, feeds is another one. We're like, if there's not the full robust set of functionality of feeds, like forget about it. Views data export. I mean, for these projects, being able to have the sort of flexible date field is another one that. I mean, luckily there's a sort of code audit module with Backdrop where you basically can fiddle with a couple quick parameters, and any Drupal 7 module will work in Backdrop. And then you can run this like code audit module to be like, here are how you would like make changes to your code to like make it align with Backdrop best practices. So I'm going to be trying to port this flexible date module into Backdrop over the summer. But yeah, for planning for the Stanford sites, Drupal 8, I would love to talk to you. I would love to find people in the library for you to talk to. Yes, please let me be your bridge to the academic world. That would be very exciting. At least in the humanities.
So changing gears a little bit, you talked about a couple of struggles that your user base had, which I'd like to hear you talk about more because it surprised me. You talked about content modeling and tokens, which actually surprises me that linguists have problems wrapping your head around what tokens are.
Oh, they just use the word for something else. Yeah, that's not a problem. It's just like, you know, with this Bulgarian linguistics site, like we had linguistic tokens, which were different than Drupal tokens, and sometimes we had Drupal tokens of linguistic tokens, which, you know, it's just one of those things you have to be careful when you're talking about it. It's like, okay, which are we talking about Drupal here, or are we talking about the linguistic side?
So what about the content modeling? Is that something that you found pretty readily, or did they have challenges getting?
It's teachable, and I actually taught a workshop on that through the library cider last quarter. I think last quarter. Yeah, no, I mean it's one of those things where people have to be able to think through what are the things that I want to do with this data. Because when you're just, you know, collecting examples from having, you know, read books with your eyeballs and you plop them in Word, and, you know, what you're going to do is like various forms of like putting it into like your paper as, you know, evidence for an argument later, like that's stuff where you can kind of figure out on the fly what exactly you want to do with it down the road, and it doesn't really matter, you know, what color you put it in the Word document. That's not going to have like long-term implications, whether you bold it or italicize it or whatever. But when you're dealing with Drupal or any other sort of database system, the decisions that you make up front about your content types are you're gonna have to live with those all the way down the line, or you're gonna have to, you know, live with converting it, or, you know, splitting fields or splitting content types, and like, you know, questions about like, should this be a, you know, 2 content types or 1? We want one that's like fully loaded with all the fields, maybe using conditional fields to show or hide things, or should they be different things? What implications does that have for like if we want to change something in one and have it like percolate out to others? So I think part of it again is these examples, and like knowing what is possible as an endpoint, and then learning to think backwards from like, well, if I want to be able to display all of these by the author's last name, then I have to have a field for the author's last name, and can't just like put the author's name into a field and like hope that the magic technology like sorts it the way that I want it to. Yeah.
I have a question on that. If you always have to do custom training within your group, or are there any like larger like sessions where you say, hey guys, you need to take basic introductory courses, how to build, like getting started with sites on Drupal. That is the course that the class of course that talks about like, oh, this is the field, this is what field means, this is how you add the field, this is why it is important to add. This is the view. Who is actually a visual SQL query builder? It's not the view from the view. And this is why you want to put that field before you add.
I've done whole Drupal workshops before with, you know, a bunch of people coming in with a bunch of different projects and different kinds of projects and different ideas, and going through that in a way that like contextualizes it with humanities use cases and explains it, you know, in a very non-technical way, kind of giving some of these examples as potential endpoints. And those have worked pretty well. It doesn't necessarily have to be like a project by project training, but at the same time, I don't know of a like general purpose, you know, go to Linda and watch their Drupal thing, where that's going to have the same like that's likely to either bore people or make them feel like it doesn't really apply to what I'm doing, or trying to have that difficulty translating between the like in the broader world generic example to like the specific humanities kind of example. I mean, I guess it's possible if you were to do sort of like a crash course on translating Drupal and contextualizing it within the humanities, and then send someone to like general purpose training, if they were of the mindset to be like comfortable watching general purpose training, maybe that could work. But I found, at least for my group, like having it really all be focused on the kinds of things that they need or they could imagine their colleagues needing, makes it a lot more palatable than just general tech training. Oh, yeah. Sorry?
Any use of decoupled for your
No. I mean, the issue with decoupled Drupal is that means more coding, and like these are non-coding people. Like on these workshops on like day 5 of 5, you know, I will grudgingly do, you know, a smattering of CSS for them on it. But I mean, for the most part, like literally they are doing everything through the web interface. And that's the ability to do everything through the web interface is I'd say 60% of the selling point of Drupal. And for the people who have the tech shops to do, who would have the tech shops to do decoupled Drupal, they don't want to do Drupal. They want to do like, you know, whatever the exciting framework of the week is. So, yeah.
Projects would you say on a yearly basis you work or other scholars at your and what's the like life cycle of like when they have an idea and you need to have a live website? How long do you see?
For like one of these complex projects, or
Either way, and it's not an answerable question, and that's what I'm just trying to get a feeling for.
well, because I hate,
So many areas where
yeah,
the experience, I'm just trying to like.
because I hate maintaining websites, and like I'm pretty tired of building them too. I am trying to discourage people from doing these complex sites. Like I'm really trying to steer people more like away from the like, let's do a website presentation archive of X or Y thing into like computational text analysis and other things where like there's nothing you have to maintain long term. You like get some stuff, you do some computation, you get an output, you write a paper, maybe put it up on a like basic informational website, and you're done. I do not want an army of Drupals to maintain or even be like peripherally. I mean, Stanford Sites is like makes a huge difference in, if I can build on Stanford Sites, I'm much more willing to do it. But you know, I hate, like every Wednesday I like brace myself for the like your site needs updates emails. Yeah, that's one of my least favorite things about this job. If it were easy to do. Well, I mean, part of the thing is that everyone needs a web presence of some sort. I don't know what the state is, and I imagine it probably varies, like department by department, about like how robust of a web presence people can build as part of their departmental website. But really, anyone doing much scholarship, especially much scholarship that has a digital component, they're going to want a place to put that up online, and you know that needs to be maintained over many years until they decide they want to like redesign it. One of the issues with that potentially for Stanford Sites is, while it's certainly much more flexible than the options we had at Berkeley, people feel very particular about how their own sites look and feel. So they're gonna want to like be hyper picky, like down to like some of them are like down to pixels, right?
Look at the slide behind you.
Was that what it ultimately bumped it off?
No, I'm just saying that that's not the Stanford identity. That's not the Stanford brand.
Yeah.
It's the Stanford colors. It doesn't say Stanford.
No. Well, and
it says student that you log in. I mean, I'm nodding enthusiastically.
Yeah. No. Well, so one of my favorite quotes about this comes from UChicago. I don't know if you ever ran into Stephen Gregory there, the Strauss archives, but he was very firm, and his quote that was like seared in my memory is, "I don't want to wear the university's tie." And I mean, that's it, right? Like, if you have to walk around with like a big Stanford blazer, like that's not what you want to put necessarily as the forefront of your like personal and professional identity. And so the more flexibility you can bake into that without like being crushed. I mean, the fact that you have CSS injector, I think, in there helps people. But yeah, I mean, that's a big issue. I mean, in terms of the number of projects, yeah, I mean, anywhere, probably these sort of like bigger archive things would maybe be on the order of like 2 or 3 a year in a department of like 20 faculty-ish. For personal websites, I think there's more people who might want things. Usually people don't want things like, right now, like where it's not like they like wake up with an idea and be like, okay, we launch Friday. I mean, I think people are willing to, if they feel like what they're doing is complex, they're willing to wait some time for a turnaround on it, especially if they can get help with it. If they feel like what they're doing is really easy, then fast turnaround is essential. But I mean, Stanford Sites is pretty. I've like requested a Stanford site on like the weekend at 4 a.m. when I was having insomnia, and like it was ready by the time I had, you know, coffee made. So well done.
Super helpful for helping us to kind of expand our thoughts on what can we do for maybe side of our platform and different, more supportive to the product.
It's hard when you're running an enterprise service. I mean,
Sucks.
yeah.
I should do that. I like that.
No, it's that's legit.
Yeah, there's a silver lining to D8 being so different from 7 and really having to start from scratch. It also is a bit of a blessing. We really get to start from scratch on the second platform, and we are starting from scratch. But that's really hard to think about if the modules that a scholar like you need isn't there. How do we get it far enough so it's usable? Maybe it isn't going to solve all the problems, but maybe it takes some weight off of so anyway, that's to think
Yeah, we should talk more. Yeah.
I don't know anything about this area.
That's okay.
I'm curious if possibly this is not a technological problem. That the issue with the platforms that are available are going to be easy enough for certain users to use in their full power. And then like you need people like the missing piece of resources is more people that can help make the bridge between the non-technologists that have needs for humanities and the technologists that are providing purely services. So just like 5 web developers that are hired as recognized as an important part.
We'll take it.
Yeah, that's.
Probably take it.
I
You know,
yeah.
I know people, I know getting people is not trivial. Like absolutely, you know, programming can't solve that.
Part of the challenge is we're going from Drupal 7, which really was something that was like basically at the point where you could hand it to people with a bit of training and they could run with it. And then the next version is totally not like that. And so part of it is like the disappointment of like, I used to use this thing, it was great. And then the next one came out and like, I don't know what happened, but like suddenly it's not usable. I mean, certainly if there are more people, you know, both sort of being the translators and, you know, sort of the human level translators, as well as, you know, doing the module porting to 8 where it could be usable. Yeah, I mean, that would be amazing. But you know, it still, I think, doesn't solve the fact that Drupal 8 is meant to be run by a like IT team. And, you know, unless every project, including projects at community colleges and at, you know, small liberal arts colleges, you know, have the funds to like build an IT team and use that to run the sites, like, I don't think Drupal 8 is going to work.
I have very unfortunate experience, but I have to say on that. Drupal 8 originally came on 7, and everyone was super excited, but there is a huge turn in philosophy, and it is really a corporate platform. It is purely corporate platform that does not allow mid-level developers or companies to work with. There is that 5 years from the beginning, it just became so obvious that it's very hard to. I'm still working, building these migrate integration, so there will be things in Drupal 8. But at this point, I feel like I can't run smaller projects on Drupal 8 platform. It was not designed for it, it's going in a different direction. And it's perfectly fine when Drupal 7 will be announced today. It's done. Backdrop CMS is a real alternative. I worked with the platform. It fills all the gaps that Drupal 7 had, like adding modules, managing things within it. It solved it like perfect. And so for academic websites, for like research, for people who have to do themselves, Drupal 8 is more designed for people who know JS, work with Composer, but since people don't need Drupal 8, they don't need Drupal. They have no JS, they have React. That's it. Drupal is out of the picture.
Yeah, the developers that in my group within the library, like they have nothing nice to say about Drupal. Never have.
Yeah, they never have. I've been here for 12 years.
Yeah. Well, but I mean, like, and that was fine when, you know, you could just basically give people Drupal and like they could build their own things in 7, but like 8, you can't give it to people. The developers won't touch it. Who's it for?
I think that's a whole different session.
No, I mean, for real, but. Yeah, I mean, asterisk, like within the digital humanities milieu, I don't think it necessarily has a place. But yeah, I mean, it does seem to have taken that, it seems to be a pretty solid enterprise platform for those things that it was designed to, you know, support. It's just that set of things is smaller than Drupal 7 included, and I'm on the wrong side of that line. So I think that's, oh yeah. Hmm? Backdropcms.org. Yeah, no, please.
So do you know what's happening?
Stanford Sites people are right there.
Oh, okay. Yeah, we had a session at 4 o'clock talking about how we are expanding the Stanford Sites as well as adding the rest. One person had the first
Yay! All right, well, thank you all for coming this morning, and unfortunately I have to run to other things for the rest of the day, but QAD at Stanford, yeah, so many things. There we go, QAD at Stanford. Please feel free to drop me a note.